Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. 'Be patient with me,' he begged, 'and I will pay back everything.' The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and he began to choke him. 'Pay back what you owe me,' he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, 'Be patient with me and I will pay it back.' But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. 'You wicked servant,' he said, 'I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?' In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart."
That's the reading of God's Word. We just listened to a song by Joey Landreth on forgiveness, and then a reading of our text today. And I sort of imagine that the unforgiving servant could have written the chorus to that song himself. Take a look. Forgiveness. I need this. Oh, that guy was in trouble with his debt. He needed it. I wish I was strong enough to hold it. He couldn't even hold it as he went around to the corner to the guy who owed him a fraction of what he had just been forgiven. Forgiveness, I confess, can't bring myself to turn to the light. And I'd imagine that as he couldn't turn to the light of grace, it was hard for him. And I guess I just want to say, you and me both, buddy, turning to the light, I think, is the great human struggle for all of us, and is what the road to discipleship is really about, is to figure out how to turn to the light and how to remain in that posture of forgiveness. So good morning, TMP. My name is Carolyn Klassen. I'm a member of the teaching team here, and we're talking about forgiveness on this Sunday in Lent, the time where we spend time contemplatively looking about the way of Jesus as he heads to the cross, and we look at Christ's sacrifice. I would like to think that I'm an expert on forgiveness. I'm a therapist, and so I work with people on that topic often in my office. And I am a human being, so I have lots of chance to ask for forgiveness and be asked for forgiveness. But the truth is, I'm not the expert I wish I was. Forgiveness is hard. And just being aware more on this topic, having it on my mind in preparation for this morning, I've had opportunity to notice all over again how I'm actually pretty lousy on the subject. This task, this life endeavor to grow more and more into the likeness of Christ when it comes to forgiveness is both brutal and beautiful. I've come up short again and again, which I think is part of what happens to us all on this side of heaven. Our world struggles with forgiveness. Who does it? What does it look like? What it means and what it doesn't mean. So before we unpack the parable, let's unpack the way our world has looked at forgiveness. First of all, false forgiveness. Salma Hayek, she is one of the actresses that was victim to Harvey Weinstein's sexual harassment and abuse. And she was quoted as saying, "I have been proud of my capacity for forgiveness." And she said later that this emphasis on forgiveness had been a cover for her cowardice, which is her word, not mine, and her unwillingness to publicly seek justice. And in this, she is aware that she failed to protect further victims. And lest you think I am singling her out for her cowardness, please note that I am so not. I'm actually singling her out for her courage to admit it. As a therapist, I see people use forgiveness all the time as cover for, this is way too uncomfortable, way too scary for us to go there and to unpack what's going to happen. I don't know how it will go, so I'm going to pretend to be super noble on the outside, but it's really a shortcut so I don't have to pay attention to everything that's uncomfortable that's happening right now. People don't deal with it by pretending it's no big deal, even when it actually is. And you can imagine that there is a cost to this, both to the individual and to the relationship. Then there's forced forgiveness. Often it's happened when people in power force forgiveness on those with less power. Historically, women, people of color, indigenous peoples, people in the LGBTQ community. There's this thought that the Bible says to forgive, so over there you need to forgive me so that I'm more comfortable, we can make this whole thing go away. That is an abuse of power. And I think the #MeToo movement rose up against forced forgiveness because it's not okay. And then there is no forgiveness, which I think the #MeToo movement has in some ways encouraged. The no forgiveness model is about swinging the pendulum from forced forgiveness to you can't make me. I think that's a perfectly natural and normal response to the pressure of forced forgiveness. Now, with the advent of social media, we see people getting skewered for tweets they've made 15 years ago, and they get put into little boxes that they are not allowed to get out of ever. The electronic record that we now have of someone's statements holds people accountable like never before. But for the record, I'm older and wiser than I was 20 years ago. I think differently on things, and I certainly express them in different ways. And I would hate for somebody to judge me now on my worst moments from a couple of decades ago. Not having grace for people's mistakes doesn't forgive the wrongs of forced forgiveness. Then there's transactional forgiveness, which is, I will forgive you, but only once you have paid back the debt in some way. Now, when you break a window, you can know how much it costs to repair the window, you give the money, the window's fixed, that all makes sense. But how do you pay back the debt of lying to somebody or betraying them or being really, really mean? Transactional forgiveness withholds forgiveness until there's a certain amount of groveling, where there's shoe kissing or weeping, imploring, begging, apologizing. It's a form of self-abasement, this sort of expecting the other person to belittle or humiliate themselves in order to earn their forgiveness. And I think that's actually dehumanizing. Then there's psychological forgiveness. And this form of forgiveness is only about the forgiver, where the person says, I forgive you for my sake and my healing only. This forgiveness is all about me and how I will be better off. It is really not about grace to others. It's all about self. Now, there's value to some of this, but in and of itself, it is incomplete. And then there is costly forgiveness, full of grace. God calls us to relationship with God, with the forgiveness that God offers us. And God invites us to forgive others as a part of that relationship to God, as part of the call that He has given us to heal our world. Forgiveness is an act of relational grace, and that's what we're going to unpack this morning. We have received it through Jesus, and now it becomes something that we almost can't help but share with others because it's just in us irresistibly wanting to come out. We're going to turn shortly now to our text. And for some of you who've been here around a while, and if you take careful notes, you will notice that I have spoken on this passage before. But I'm talking about it again for two reasons. One is it was on the list and Pastor Paul told me I had to. But the other is that whether Pastor Paul knew it or not, when he assigned it to me, this story, this is one that I have spent more time thinking about than any other parable that Jesus has taught. There were years where I went back to this parable a dozen or more times per day. This parable is personal, deeply personal for me. This parable has invited me to a full-on brawl with my wounded self that wanted to be bitter and angry and vengeful. This parable was an uninvited guest to my pity party. And let me tell you, this parable is a party pooper at any person's pity party. Say that 5 times fast, exactly. This parable is a party pooper at any person's pity party. I think I have fought the truth of it, but I'm glad to say the truth won. And in my fight, to my surprise, I won too. And the frustrating part is that even though the truth won, I still tussle with it on the regular. I wish it wasn't true, but I also think I'm not the only one. To be human is to struggle with the pain of being wronged. So a bit of background. My children are now adults, but when they were in grade 3 and 5, my husband walked out of our marriage after months of silence about what was going to happen. He left me guessing for a full year after that about why he needed to leave. And when I heard for certain, it was apparent that it really had nothing to do with me. However, at the time, as he left, I was left with a feeling that somehow it was my fault, that I had made it worse, and I was some sort of unreasonable monster for expecting us to wrestle with our relationship together as he contemplated ending it. He had been a pastor and had invited me into a life of ministry with him, something that I had taken very seriously, and now he was leaving. I was lost. And let me tell you, when a pastor leaves his marriage, well, his wife can circle in some pretty dark places about what that says about how utterly unlovable she must be. I'm trying really hard to be respectful of his story and to not tell it, just mine. So let me just say that my trust with him became non-existent as a result of what I experienced as the months unfolded. When he and I got married, we committed our lives together, and I believed, I knew, or at least I thought I knew, that he always would be. So the sense of betrayal that I had felt at so many levels was profound. The guy who had encouraged me and loved me and been on my team for the better part of 2 decades now moved to being against me, off my team. I was hurt with a capital H. And here's the thing, I was raising 2 incredible kids, and I realized I was in danger of being swamped by my reaction to what he had done in ways that would get in the way of me parenting these boys, in the way of enjoying my friends, being able to be fully me in the therapy room or as a teacher in front of the classroom. Was I going to live out of my hurt, or was I going to live out of my wonderful life? I needed a way to move through my state of upset because this was no way to live. The separation had taken enough from me, and I didn't want to give it any more. But what's more, I needed to figure out how to move forward through this as a follower of Jesus. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't know how to do it. And one day, and I can remember the exact spot where I was standing beside my secretary, and we were chatting back and forth, and this parable popped into our conversation. And I realized, just as the song we just heard, that although it was hard, I would find a way to turn to the light. This parable wrecked me with its grace, and it had me shift towards grace in ways that I think shifted the whole conversation inside of me to one that led to forgiveness. It led me out of the prison that I was in danger of creating for myself and into healing. So look with me into the story. Let's unpack it. The parable starts in Matthew 18, starting at verse 21. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Now, the Talmud, which they would have referred to often, would have said you have to forgive 3 times. Forgive 3 times and then you're off the hook. He knows that Jesus is someone different, and so he ups it. He ups it to 7. Like 7 should be enough, right? And he probably picked 7 because 7 was symbolic in ancient Near and Israelite culture, because it communicated a sense of fullness. You can see here the word for 7 and the word for complete have exactly the same consonants. They're the same. And so it made sense for 7 to be complete. Peter thought he was being brilliant with 7. But then Jesus answered, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. And you can see how that's parallel to Genesis 4:24. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. And so you've heard it said, right? If one person knocks out one eye, then you're going to want to go back and you're going to want to what? Take out both eyes, yeah. And if somebody knocks out one tooth, what are you going to want to do? Knock them all out. That's right. That's what is our natural inclination. That's what Lamech's inclination was as well. And Jesus now flips this reference from unlimited vengeance to unlimited grace. Peter wants to know, when is enough enough? And Jesus says, you're not asking the right question. Verse 23. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. The original language didn't say 10,000 bags of gold. It said 10,000 talents. Now, a talent was 20 years of a day's laborer's wages. And that was the greatest currency denomination in the empire. You couldn't get any bigger. And 10,000, back in the day of no calculators, was the highest number for what the Greek language actually had a specific word. So in other words, this guy owes the king the highest amount of money that you could put down on paper in that day. And if we do a quick rough back of the envelope math and put it into today's funds, when you look at Manitoba's minimum wage and how many days per week and all that stuff, I'm not an accountant, but I think I got this right. It's $5.25 billion the guy owes. That's crazy. Let that sink in. Verse 25. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. Everything? $5.25 billion. Do you hear how desperate and how ridiculous the servant is here? To ask for patience to pay back everything? There is no way on God's green earth that this servant could begin to put a dent in his debt. Maybe it's desperate, or maybe it's arrogance to think that he could pay it back. The debt is insurmountable, and yet he begs. He's scrambling. Now, we can laugh at this guy and say how utterly ridiculous he is, but who of us hasn't tried to pay back our debt to God? I'm so sorry, God. I blew it here. If you just get me out of the jam, I promise I'll go to church every single Sunday, right? Just please forgive me and I'll stop drinking, or please forgive me and I'll stop, whatever, fill in the blank. It's the equivalent of, I'll put $20 down on my multi-billion-dollar debt every week, I promise. It's a little desperate, right? Verse 27, the servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. And notice here the compassion. The master just cancels the debt. It doesn't say the master was angry or resentful, just kind. It actually almost seemed to be relatively easy for when he sees the servant's reaction of desperation to be kind to him in light of this. But I also want you to notice the costliness of the forgiveness for the king. $5.25 billion is bigger than the budget of entire countries in this region. The grace here is stunning. Verse 28, but when the servant found out, he went to find one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. Now, silver coin was roughly a day's wage for a laborer. So again, rough math. Today's math at minimum wage, if you do the calculations, that's about $10,000, a little over. That's a chunk of change. And I don't think I've ever thought that this was a real debt. Like $10,000, if somebody owed you $10,000 and did or didn't pay it off, that would make a dent in your bottom line, right? Like it matters. And it seems like it is a lot of money. It is, except when you compare it to $5.25 billion. Then it starts to look a little cheap. Verse 29, his fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay it back. Now, to pay $10,000 debt back, if you're making minimum wage, it's going to take a while because you got to keep some to buy your own food and stuff, right? His capacity to make money isn't high, but he pleads. And you might think that the first guy would remember what it is like to plead for mercy. But, back to our text, he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. "You wicked servant," he said, "I canceled all of that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" Hold space for that. Wouldn't you have just automatically wanted to have mercy for your fellow servant after what you experienced from me? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or your sister from your heart. Timothy Keller says about this parable that it is a story about a man asking for forgiveness and then being utterly unchanged when he gets it. And I think that's the challenge for us. As we realize how we have been forgiven, will we allow ourselves to be changed when we receive it? Maybe even, or hopefully, utterly changed by it? Here's the thing. An essential part of receiving forgiveness is believing it, receiving it, and then having it land in you and being changed by it. The vertical part of forgiveness between myself and God, or between you and God, involves two big principles. First is humility. This coming before God and saying, I have messed up a lot. Even before breakfast, right? You can hardly get out of bed before having a thought that is not wholesome and uplifting and building. I owe so much, I can't possibly pay it back. I'm in so deep, I will never get out myself. And that's combined, this humility, with grateful joy, where there's this impossibly large debt that has been canceled. There's this sense of, I'm free! Like, wow, this is incredible. Being forgiven a huge debt and living in that space, that's freedom. It would be impossible to not be changed by it. And that vertical angle of those two factors then prepares us for the horizontal, where there's this humility. I'm no better than you are. Yeah, you screwed up. So did I. And then also this capacity to be generous. I'm actually great because I've just been forgiven. I'm in a good space. I have the ability to be generous to you because I have already got the best gift. Your debt doesn't hold me captive because I'm so much more than what you owe me. And that frees a person up to look at another that has wronged them with empathy and to be able to extend that costly grace. Now, it's no coincidence that the way of forgiveness is the way of the cross. Jesus showed us the path of forgiveness most clearly on the cross, as he gave us forgiveness in his death, through his death, and as while he was up there, extended forgiveness to those that had put him there. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. Timothy Keller, in his book Forgive, says, God's mercy must and will make us merciful. If it doesn't, then we never understood or accepted God's mercy and truth. If you believe the gospel, that you are saved by sheer grace and the free forgiveness of God, and you still have a grudge, at the very least it shows that you are blocking the actual effect of the gospel in your life. Or perhaps you're kidding yourself and you don't believe this gospel at all. Either way, spiritually speaking, to not forgive somebody is to put yourself in a kind of jail. The final act of the parable, where the unforgiving servant is thrown into prison, it seems harsh, but is really quite realistic. The self-centeredness that grows when you stay angry at somebody, when you hold things against them, when you continue to regard them as if they're liable to you and they owe it, that is a prison. I love the freedom that this parable offers to all of us. I know, I get that forgiveness is countercultural and radical. Forgiveness has not been freedom for a lot of people because it's often forgiving has been put them into a prison because some of the false understandings of forgiveness. We haven't understood the costly forgiveness that the calling of Christ has for us. That forgiveness is grace. Forgiveness is freedom. So we're going to look at a few principles of forgiveness to round this out. It's taken not only from this story, but from the whole biblical text. So first of all, in Costly Forgiveness 101, the pain of a wronged person matters. When you have forgiven, it doesn't mean that it doesn't still hurt. When you work towards forgiveness, there isn't this sense of, okay, so buck up and forget about it. Your hurt heart is relevant, and it gets to matter even as you work towards forgiveness. Second, there is no timeline on forgiveness. Have you ever read the Psalms? The psalmist laments about wrongs that have been done to him, and he goes on and on and on. The timelines we place on forgiveness are human manufactured, not from God. Rushing forgiveness does harm. It's okay to take years. 3, forgiveness is granted before it's felt. You do it here before you feel it here. It's a commitment to not keep putting your hand on their throat. Or sometimes, in my thinking, when I noticed my hands there, I had to take them off, sometimes multiple times a day. 4, grant forgiveness first before pursuing reconciliation. Spend time in the light before you go after reconciliation with the other person. Spend time in mercy and grace and kindness. Because when you have that conversation with the person who has wronged you, you don't want to be angry and bitter, because that's going to shift the conversation. If you can speak lovingly and kindly and connectedly, it will matter. 5, justice and forgiveness go well together. Justice is a way of loving your neighbor. Vengeance is a way of not loving your neighbor. Vengeance says, I will feel better by sticking it to you worse than you stuck it to me. I will make you pay. Once you are more miserable than I am, then I will feel better. Doesn't really work, but people try. Vengeance will leave the world eyeless and toothless. Vengeance is not the way of Jesus. Forgiveness lets go of vengeance and frees you to pursue justice. Justice is making things right. Justice is a form of love. Justice says, I'll make it hard for you to keep hurting me or to keep hurting people. Once you have forgiven someone, you look to make the situation genuinely the best, not only for yourself, but for the other person, for others in the community. So, justice calls the police after the hit. It fires the pastor after they have abused their power. It seeks a prison sentence for someone who has committed a serious crime. Justice does not sweep the wrong under the rug, but it handles the situation without vengeance. 6, it is never kind to loving to let someone else continue to sin, which is what happens when we ignore or downplay the wrong in ways that allow it to continue. 7, your heart may have forgiven, but your body remembers it, and inconveniently long. There isn't the scope here to look at the impact of trauma on the body, but I often explain to couples after there has been a significant wounding that even when there has been forgiveness in the relationship, the after effects will continue. Maybe when a certain song plays on the radio that harkens back, or maybe when he uses a certain tone of phrase in a certain way at a certain point in an argument, or when she comes home 15 minutes later than she said she would. The reaction can be huge because it feels awful. That's not unforgiveness. That's the body remembering the pain of what happened back then and having it come alive all over again in a way that person doesn't have control over because it's a reflex. 8, forgiveness and reconciliation are 2 different relationship events. Reconciliation is highly dependent on the other person's willingness to participate in the process. And that's a whole other topic, and that's for another morning. Now, to be clear, this parable didn't order me into forgiveness for my former husband. It didn't mandate it. It didn't make me. It invited me to free myself from the prison of unforgiveness. It also didn't come easily, and it didn't stay easily. So what happened when I came upon this song, which is going to get put up in a minute, I printed it off and I put it 8.5 by 11 beside the mirror in my bathroom, and I read it every time I brushed my teeth, every time I washed my hands, multiple times a day, because I had to find a way to marinate in it. And so there were lines like, I then shall live as one who's been forgiven. Can you imagine how that, if you stay in that space, how that changes your tone? I'll walk with joy to know my debts are paid. So greatly pardoned, I'll forgive my brother. I then shall live as one who's learned compassion. I've been so loved that I'll risk loving too. The idea that I will live as one who's been forgiven, every time when I would be in the bathroom, I would read it. It made so much sense, and it was such an important reminder, but it was so hard to make it stick. These lyrics reminded me of that parable, and I read it and I do think that it shaped my emails to my former husband, and it shaped the way I made decisions about how we co-parented our kids. I know I wasn't perfect, but I do know that I would have made harsher, meaner, and more vindictive decisions if I hadn't read that multiple times every day. Henry Nouwen says, "Forgiveness is the name of love practiced among people who love poorly. The hard truth is that all people love poorly. We need to forgive and be forgiven every day, every hour increasingly. This is the great work of love among the fellowship of the weak that is the human family. The choice of grace is possible because of the gift of grace from Jesus." Watch.
I've had some challenges in the last couple of years myself, and ultimately, I believe that suffering leads to salvation. And in fact, it's the only way that we have to somehow accept, not deny, but feel our suffering and feel our losses, and then we make one of two decisions. We either decide to go through the gate of resentment, which leads to vengeance, which leads to self-harm, which leads to harm to others, or we go through the gate of forgiveness, which leads to grace. Just as Christ did on the cross. He suffered terribly, and he was broken by it. To look upon the people who were causing that suffering, or the situation that was causing that suffering, with compassion and with forgiveness. And that's what opens the gates of heaven for all of us.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, Carolyn. There are so many questions. So I'm going to try to focus on ones that I think will perhaps invite us into even deeper contemplation. But to start off, to say this, Carolyn, thank you for taking the risk to share your story. It has cost you much to be able to share the insights you've gained with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here's a question that's come in. I ask this as a person with a Black identity. Many of the world do not know the extent of harm done to the Black community in the past and even till date, because learning of genuine history is stifled or watered down so it can be bearable to the ears. It feels like constant gaslighting because lots of people, even well-meaning people, don't fully understand the many layers of harm, so when you talk about it, you're met with resistance or eye-rolling or why do they keep complaining? How do we forgive constant gaslighting?
I hope that those of us with skin like mine heard what that person just wrote, because we don't get it. And I'm not quite sure how we figure out how to start getting it, except really brave, insightful people text us messages like that so we have a chance. I think this is one of those times where forgiveness should not come easily, because it's not right. It's just not right, and it's ongoing, right? So to expect resolution is to minimize what the wrong that is happening. And so I think we have to be aware that there is a cost to people of color, there's a cost to other folks that are marginalized in our world. And I don't even know what to say, right? Like, I'm a little bit speechless as a person who's not a person of color to know that I am a part of the group that participates in that gaslighting, sometimes unwittingly. And I think we as people who are in the main have to figure out how to invite conversation, how to stay tender, how to recognize that we might be messing up without even realizing it, and continue the invitation to say, if I don't know, if I do something and I don't know it, I still actually want to hear it. Because gaslighting makes a person crazy. It's just crazy making, and I don't like the thought that we're doing that to anybody.
Just to be sure, gaslighting, give us a quick definition.
Well, gaslighting is when somebody says, the sky is pink. And you say, no, I'm pretty sure it's blue. And they say, no, I'm sure it's pink. And they try to talk you out of what you know to be true. And it's crazy making because you know it's not right. You know it doesn't make sense. And people keep, in this case, would say, it's no big deal. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? We don't get to decide how big a deal it is. And I think that's where we have to really learn and understand. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for tackling that. And yes, I agree. We need to be so much more deliberate about understanding the harm that has been done and owning that, and not wanting to hurry people through what they've experienced to somehow perhaps make it a little bit easier on us so the weight doesn't feel so
That's that forced
weighty.
forgiveness thing. Yeah.
This came in 3 parts, so I think this person was joining you in your teaching.
Okay.
I keep hearing the phrase forgive and forget. Am I to forgive and simply forget the wrongs people do? I hope to get past it, but do I need to let it go and forget what they did or said? When a person keeps doing or saying mean things, how do I forgive? I know God forgives me many times, but I'm just a simple human with a limited human ability to forgive. I am quick to forgive, but I've experienced times when others aren't as quick to forgive me. How do I just accept that? So there's a Costco family pack of questions, really.
And didn't you just hear it all in one about how messy and hard this forgiveness is, and how it's a lifelong journey. And when we put pressure on ourselves to figure it out in the morning, we do ourselves a disservice, and the cost of discipleship a disservice, right? I think we spend our time figuring it out and working to be more and more into the likeness of Christ. And I mean, Christ found a way on that cross as he was nailed to say, forgive them. I'm not there. But I think that's what I can see on the horizon is what I want to grow towards.
Yeah. So the specific question is about, it started off with this notion of forgiving and forgetting. What quick insight would you give us about the forgiving and forgetting parts? How do we manage that?
Well, I think God gave us brains, and to forget seems like that's insulting to who we are as people. And the problem is it's also insulting to our bodies because our bodies hold when we've been hurt, and we cannot forget. I think that's where spending time with Jesus and his word and with people who are doing gracious, kind, forgiving things themselves, it kind of infects us in the best way possible. And we find a way to remember it, but not in a way that holds our hands around the other person's throat. We find a way to remember it with compassion, because I think often, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. I know that when I have been told I've been really hurtful to people, it's not like I got up in the morning and say, I'm going to zing you one because I hate you. It's like out of my own pain and out of my own obliviousness, out of my own whatever, I move about and I'm hurtful to people, which is not okay. People need to call me on it. But I think if we recognize that often when people hurt us, they don't get it. And that's why they do it. So that means we have to take care of ourselves in it, but we also can have compassion towards them with spending time understanding what it means and what it doesn't mean.
Here's a question that just came in. If someone does not ask for forgiveness and is not remorseful for their actions, but you choose to forgive, is that considered forgiveness?
Yes. I have my cheat notes here because I thought someone might ask some questions, and I'm not so good at memorizing everything. In Romans 12, verse 8, it says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live with peace with everyone. So in other words, it's your job to look after your side of the street and do what you can to make it right, and you are not responsible for what the other person does. So you get freed from whatever that reconciliation can't be because the other person isn't willing to work the program.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. There were a number of questions that were sort of around that theme. Costly Forgiveness 101 makes so much sense. It makes me wonder, however, There is no timeline on forgiveness. Sounds great. What happens if I take my time, take years, but die before I forgive somebody?
Does the grace of God have limits?
Not that I know of.
I don't think that I'm going to be all the way there on anything until I get to the other side. So I think that pretty much describes all of us all the time, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
You can disagree. You're the pastor.
No, Carolyn. I really appreciate your answer. It's a good one. I am part of the LGBT community. I have a lot of hurt and anger towards the church for how it has hurt me in my community. How do I forgive the church while it continues the behavioral patterns of neglect and staying comfortable that led us to this place?
So first let me say that whatever I say is very secondary to a very brave person who let us all know something pretty important.
Yep.
I think we have to listen and hear and know that it matters and that people are watching, and that even if we think we're not being hurtful, we don't get to decide if we're being hurtful or not. We have to hear and listen and find out when we are hurtful and learn from that. And I think the call of God in our lives is to keep forgiving, but then the call of God in our lives is to say, I'm not going to keep helping you keep hurting me. Like that's nowhere in there is that biblical. And so I can understand when people who are feeling on the margins of a community and feeling like they are being related to in a way that's hurtful, that they have to pull back, or that they have to get angry, or that they have to look after themselves while the rest of us are figuring out how not to be so hurtful. And so I think we have to figure out and work at this, and it's the long road towards figuring this out. And I grieve that while we figure this out, a person like that continues to hurt.
Yeah. You've named something very important, and that is that the relationship that we celebrate within a faith community is the kind of relationship that has the long road in mind. The fact that there are hurts that haven't yet even come to the surface because people haven't yet had the courage to say,
right?
And there's likely more to come, and for us to be ready to say when that occurs, that we don't dismiss it or we don't think it's of no consequence, but rather to own that. And that's been true on so many other occasions. And here there's yet another opportunity for us to be so deliberate to say, yeah, we need to own that.
And I think it's really uncomfortable, and it gets really messy, and it gets painful and awkward and uncomfortable. But that's what God calls us to, is to have a space where people can say, can I tell you how you're hurting me? Wouldn't we want a place that can say that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Would you close our service?
Mm-hmm. So we have a sign on the wall in our house that says, sawdust is man glitter. My husband Jim is a carpenter, and so he comes home some days covered in man glitter. Our series during Lent now is called Dust and Ashes, knowing that there was an ancient Jewish blessing for disciples that said, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. May you follow so closely behind that what he kicks up with his feet is something that you get covered with. And so I've been imagining myself in these last days covered in the dust of our Rabbi Jesus. And if we think about, dust being glitter, then perhaps we can see that dust in a very different way. And if any of you have children and have worked with glitter, you know that there's this paradoxical effect that you can't get it off of you. It just sticks, but it also goes everywhere. And that it infects everything. And so I'm going to invite you to stand to receive a blessing. And as Pastor Paul often reminds us, when you get to receive a blessing, I invite you to hold your hands out to receive it, and I will hold my hand out to give it to you. May the forgiveness glitter that covers you as you follow Jesus be so felt and full and real and big and high and glittery that those then with whom you come in contact with will be covered in that glitter as well. May those that love you, hurt you, wrong you, misunderstand you, and are misunderstood by you feel the glittery effects of the forgiveness that has been extended to each and every one of you. Amen.